Yeah, that's it. So I have here today Steve Bell, who is the cartoonist, the political cartoonist from The Guardian. Has been doing it for 30 years?
30 years at The Guardian, yeah.
30 years at The Guardian. Was also, I read on Wikipedia that you did something for the Clash's Sandinista album.
Yeah, that's going back a bit, yeah.
That's very cool, a man with some cred. I've been going through the strips at your website. There are strips that show Gordon Brown as a gigantic ass that is sort of floating through the sky and is going to crush everyone. There's a continuous sort of gag with Margaret Thatcher, who I guess has Alzheimer's?
Well, she's very old and very, very
a little forgetful, yes.
Yeah, I mean, that film made a big thing of it, but I mean, she still does it. She still actually appears at public functions and stuff.
To the podium, would you use that?
Okay,
Yes.
so I'll use this one.
Yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
It'll be on in a second.
All right. Oh yeah. Okay.
The Margaret Thatcher, whenever she comes up, it's called the series is called "Where Am I Now?"
Yeah, I think it's only really recently. You don't want to take the piss out of people because they've got Alzheimer's. I mean, I've had family members. It's a terrible, awful disease which you don't make light of. But Margaret Thatcher she's still been functioning publicly until very recently, in fact. So I think, the film, which I haven't seen actually, I must see it sometime, The Iron Lady, but it sort of paints a sort of very sad picture, and maybe it is, but as I say, she has continued to be a public person until very recently, so the level and extent of her Alzheimer's is open to sort of question, but she obviously is suffering from something. But that wasn't that wasn't really the intention behind. I wasn't attacking her for having Alzheimer's. It was just her looking back and where am I kind of thing. Where am I now?
Anyway, so yes, very funny cartoons. And so I think we'll start the program. You will take us through a number of them?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, because, get on my feet and hopefully the other mic will work. Can you hear me okay? Right, well, thanks for coming. Thanks for the introduction, Keith. Thanks to Penn for inviting me. It's a huge honor to be invited to New York. I've never been invited to New York before for anything. And I better show you some cartoons because I'm sure there'll be aspects of my work that you probably will not have heard of at all. My work's mainly about British politics, obviously, because that's where I live. And I'll explain this picture that's up here. Belle Epoque, this is the title of an exhibition I had last year at the Cartoon Museum in London, which is a great little museum. It's very small, but it's very ambitious. And they did a catalogue for it, which this is the cover of. And just to explain the picture, it's all the prime ministers, essentially, that I've worked under, or abused, if you like. Starting, of course, with Margaret Thatcher at the back there, then moving on to John Major in front of her, and then on to Tony Blair, who's at the right there. Then Tony Blair is followed by Gordon Brown. That's me, supposedly, sitting next to him in my artist garment. And then at the front here, with the big ass and the pink head, that's David Cameron, who you might have heard of. They all have their different quirks and different features, and perhaps this talk will explain sort of what I do, how I go about it, and why it's so fascinating. I'm a complete political obsessive by now. I've been doing it for so long. I mean, I've been cartooning for I just realized, when I was talking to Keith, my God, I've been cartooning for a living for 35 years. I was a very unsuccessful teacher for a couple of years before that. I studied art for many years. Thought I'll be socially useful now. I'll come out of college, I'll be a teacher. I was one of the worst teachers in the world. I just wasn't cut out to be a teacher. I was just bad. The worst thing was I found it terribly stressful because I didn't feel I could do it. So it was to flee from teaching that I turned to cartooning. I started doing children's comics. That's how I first started earning money at it. It took a little while to get a break in political cartoons, as it were. My first big break was doing a thing called Maggie's Farm. Now, obviously, Maggie This was in the late 70s. Maggie Thatcher came to power in 79. This is obviously it's Ronald Reagan. You may remember him. He was your president for 8 years, from 1980 to 1988. This is from 86, this particular strip. And basically what I do, it is about observation. Now, it does help to see the politicians in the flesh, believe it or not, though unfortunately I never did get to see Reagan. I've seen all the British ones, of course, because they're easily accessible. And I've seen some of the American ones, but not Reagan, so I had to do them off the TV. But the things you observe about people, and what's important with politicians is their body language and their podium language. That's another thing, how they behave at podiums, because public speaking is vital to politicians. Politicians are there to sort of articulate what we believe and to sort of give it back to us. And I'm talking about everybody, all opinions, all shades of opinions. And if they hit the spot, they say they articulate something that we believe in. They think, great, yeah, that's what it's about. They're about interpreting the world to us. And in some ways you could say you could sort of cheapen it by saying it's telling us what we want to hear. But there's a whole art and a whole skill to it. And you might think I hate them all, but actually I don't. I'm very, very fascinated to watch them. Reagan was a case in point. Now, he's got this big deal, chief of the world body language. Here he is. Here he is coming up the stairs to Air Force One. And he's walking up the stairs of the airplane, walking upstairs backwards. Here he goes. He's going, hi. He's doing this kind of big jock thing, swinging around. And he's got this sort of big open crotch. He was doing like that. And and that's very important. Body leader language is very, and you find when body leaders get, when world leaders get together, they compete to pat each other on the ass. You know? who's the biggest cheese? And obviously the American president is the biggest cheese in any meeting, so he's the big cheese. The other thing that fascinates me is not just the way they look, but the language they use. Now, you probably, I can see a lot of you will remember Reagan. A lot of you probably won't. You were too young. But Reagan had a special way of speaking, and there are phrases he uses and repeated. He saw himself as the good guy. You remember the phrase, the evil empire, when he was talking about the USSR. So this is me sort of paraphrasing him, if you like. So it's, I hate to say it, but there I go again. You know, so it's kind of, it's a very easy style he had, and people liked him. He was a very likable guy. But what he said was actually quite noxious. You'll forgive me for quoting a well-known movie, but the force really is with us on this one. He actually said that. I mean, you can't believe a politician would actually say something so ridiculous. But he did. I want to hear them cry uncle. He said that as well. I don't know what that means. That's an American thing. You'd have to explain that to me. A cry uncle? What's that all about? Anyway, I can understand why you Europeans are being so violently hostile to our US policy. Now, you have to put yourselves back in the 80s, the early 80s, a very difficult time. The Cold War was blazing away. Both sides were building missiles like crazy. These things called intermediate range nuclear weapons. They were building them all over Europe. In Germany, in east of Germany, the Russians were installing them. In Britain and all over Europe, the Americans were installing. So, of course, the only people who were going to get fried were people in Europe, which was a bit unfortunate. So that's why there was a very widespread anti-nuclear movement. There still is, but obviously some ways the heat's off. And that's when Greenham Common came into being. You might remember the great peace camp, the women's peace camp there. So this is the climate then. This is what this is all about. This is about the special relationship. We, of course, there she is, Margaret Thatcher. That sort of summarised. And now I'll tell you in detail about Margaret Thatcher, because she was a woman who's very important to me, partly because I hate her so much, and partly what she did to Britain, to British politics and the world. She drove, almost single-handedly, drove Britain to the right, and it was almost like a permanent change. I hope it's starting to come unpicked now, but more of that anyway. We have in the UK things called party conferences. You have party conventions, which happen once every 4 years. We have party conferences that happen every autumn, every early autumn. And they happen, usually, it used to be at seaside resorts. Nowadays it's in big cities, usually in the north and the Midlands. In this case, it was in Blackpool in 1979, her first conference as Prime Minister. I didn't go to it, but I did it from imagination. So I imagined what it would be like. And here, things like Transylvanian undead against the health service, denationalise the blood banks now. All this was a mad fantasy then, but of course it all came true under Margaret. Things like Harrods customers against food subsidies, that's especially a very wealthy person's shop. West Byfleet, which is an area of Surrey, Homosexual Extermination League. All kinds of nutcases and crazies show them. I mean, you didn't invent right-wing crazies in this country. We've had them, in Europe for a long, long time. But there is something about these events. Now, I live in Brighton, where they do occasionally have party conferences, so I'd be able to go down the road and see them. This is my early caricature of Margaret, and you can see it's not really a caricature at all. The thing for me, and I'm quite a slow learner, is that I have to understand the character before I can do a caricature. And the other thing that politicians do is they create their own image, and Margaret Thatcher is a case in point. She created her own image as the Iron Lady. You may have this thing about the Iron Lady. That's an image that she actually lived up to and built up to herself. I mean, I think it might have even come from somebody in the Soviet Union who described her as the Iron Lady, or they certainly said she was trying to wear Churchill's trousers, these phrases. But she took that on board, and she thought that was great, so she played up to it. So this is an early one. It's basically just a rendering of a photograph. It's not really a caricature at all. This blonde woman. She was a blonde woman and right wing, but that's not really a caricature, is it? But it took like within a year, I started to get the hang of her, and she started to change her image. She darkened her hair, became more steely, and she lowered her voice and started to talk like that. Now, this cartoon was never published, but it's sort of, I was quite pleased with it because it was getting somewhere. I think I'm getting somewhere with this. As you can also see, there's something about the eyeballs with Margaret that's actually very important, and I'll come back to this in a sec. This is the following year, her conference in Brighton in 1980. Now, I actually did go to this one. This was before I lived in Brighton, but I did go and visit it. And this is what it was like. This was drawn from life. This is actually what it was. It felt like a gathering of the undead. It was really as weird as that. It was really uncomfortable for me. I was a young sort of stripling at the time. But it was like a gathering of zombies. There she is, this zombie in chief. And you can see what's happened. The eyeballs are starting to resolve themselves into something. These are two of her sidekicks. That's a guy called William Whitelaw, and this is a guy called Keith Joseph. They're long dead now. And this is give her a big hand, right a rip. I was throwing every cheap gag I could think of into it. And there she is, resplendent as the other. This is her landslide in 83. She came back for re-election 4 years later after 79 in 83. And this was a landslide victory. I mean, there were two reasons for the landslide. One was the Falklands War, which had taken place, and it was a big gamble, but it paid off for her big time. At the time, I was very, very much opposed to the war, and still would be now. I mean, the effect in Argentina was beneficial because it did get rid of a very, very nasty regime. And the Falkland Islands, it's a long way off the mainland, so I think the Argentinian case is a bit specious. But nonetheless, the idea that you should have such a stupid war in this day and age was just horrifying. And the Falklands War set a kind of precedent whereby you'd had the Vietnam War, which we all know about, and which I remember growing up as a kid in the 60s having these terrible images every day of body counts and death, and really quite lurid and quite nasty stuff. But the one thing that kind of imagery on the TV does, it puts people off war. But they sort of learnt that lesson. Well, I'll come back to that in a minute. But anyway, this is her resplendent in 1983. This is jumping forward another 4 years. This is 1987. Now you can see the eyeballs, how they've resolved themselves. There's the left eyeball, which is mad and staring, and there's the right eyeball, which is hooded like that. So we put them together, mad, staring, and hooded, and with the sort of voice, and I intend to go on and on and on and on. And that's what she said. The problem was she won in 87. She won another landslide. But Margaret's problem, she was slightly, I don't know, not slightly potty. She was completely potty. She believed her own propaganda. There was an element of mania about her, which is expressed in the eyes. And she introduced this thing called the poll tax, which is probably one of the most unjust tax taxes imaginable, whereby instead of having a property tax, which was called the rates, which is paid by people who have property, which tends to be people who can afford to pay tax, she did away with that and had a flat rate tax on everybody, which meant that everybody, all the poor, so a household of 10 poor people would pay 10 times the household of 2 extremely rich people like the Duke of Westminster, or, you know. It was the most insanely unjust tax, and she thought this would be a popular measure. It wasn't, and it did for her politically. And this is from 1989. And the whole poll tax thing had been going on a couple of years, and she was in serious trouble. She really was. But she drove on. She would not yield. She would not yield. There was originally a speech bubble attached to this cartoon which said, "In the words of St. Francis of Assisi, quack, quack, moo, moo, cock-a-doodle-doo." And this sort of is getting near the end now. This is 1990 in the autumn, and this is what the Tory party were praying for. They wanted a tree to fall on them. They wanted her just to go because they were 20 points behind in the polls. That was serious. They knew there was an election not too far on the horizon. They had to do something. They had to get rid of. Well, this was wishful thinking, but within a couple of weeks, in fact, she was on her way out. And this guy, her faithful deputy, a guy called Geoffrey Howe, who was always depicted as a sheep because it's too long to go into. Another a Labour politician who said being attacked by Geoffrey Howe was like being attacked by a dead sheep. So all the cartoonists did him as a sheep. Anyway, she had put upon him, he'd been a loyal, slavish deputy for many, many years, but she bossed him about just once too often. I think that features in the Iron Lady film. It's quite an important part of it. And he resigned his post, and he gave this devastating resignation speech. Now, in Parliament, I don't know if it's the same here, when a minister resigns, they're entitled to give a speech to Parliament, and nobody can interrupt them. They say whatever they want. It's a strange convention, but in this case, it worked brilliantly well, because he gave this speech which ripped into her. It accused her of completely, shafting any policy he wanted. He was Foreign Secretary, had been, and he said she had undermined him. That speech enabled Michael Heseltine, this guy who was a long opponent of Margaret, to weigh in and challenge her for the leadership. And that's really what did for her. And within a couple of days, she was gone. Now, these two cartoons were the first big cartoons I did for The Guardian. I've been doing a strip in The Guardian since 1981. This was in 1990. And these are the two big op-ed page things. So there she is, and there's an early appearance of John Major at the back there. This is a guy called Douglas Hurd, the other crocodile, and that's the sheep, and there's Heseltine as well. And that's sort of sums it up. The colour ones, I had a very nice slot in the New Statesman doing a half-page colour drawing once a week, which was really great. And that's the Mad Eye, the only time I ever saw photographic evidence of it, and there it was. And that appeared in the paper, I think it was in the Financial Times, the day of her when she resigned. So I felt triumphantly vindicated. And that's one of the advantages of drawing, because you can draw what you know to be there, whereas the camera, which never lies, of course, but the camera cannot always find that sudden moment of zany madness in the eyeball, yet we know it's there. This guy who took over from her was a completely different, kettle of fish, as we say, completely different character, much less charismatic. As you can see, he's having trouble competing with the lampshade in his framing. Very dull, very grey, glasses, very boring guy. He sort of rose from nowhere. Nobody quite knew what he was. But I had the advantage of going to I'd actually got sent by the Guardian to go to that conference that year in Bournemouth, and I was able to draw them all close. This was before Margaret resigned. And he was, I think, Chancellor of the Exchequer, the finance minister. And he gave this speech, so I was sitting there drawing him, and I was sort of fascinated by his top lip. And he has this weird top lip. And it struck me like he's got an ingrowing moustache. It's a weird kind of... So I had that sort of, it always helps to have that kind of backup when you're visualising somebody. So in a couple of weeks later, he became Prime Minister. I only caricatured him about once. I tried, and I didn't really have the means to do it. So they asked me to do a special about the fall of Thatcher and the arrival of John Major. So I thought, what shall I do? I'll do a Superman spoof. That's what I'll do. So Queen Kong is sort of wrecking the world in her sort of death fall, as it were. And then who comes to the rescue but this sort of mild-mannered bank clerk from Kent, who had, in my book, was a pretty useless guy. So I thought, oh, I'll make him a super useless man. So where Superman has sort of all-over blue body stocking and sleek red briefs, John Major has a charcoal grey suit and Airtex wire fronts, which is the classic British underpant, if you like. And that's entirely where that was entirely just a sort of moment of comic logic. But they sort of stuck. It was weird. As soon as I started doing him underpants, I had a terrific response, and there was a kind of magical connection between John Major and underpants that somehow clicked. So the strange thing about this, the business of being a political cartoonist is you do these gags and you keep repeating them, and people say, oh, you're not going to do that old gag again. Well, you have to. You've got to go. You've got to push it, because nobody else is doing it. Nobody else was doing him underpants, so I had to. And it was great fun as well. He was actually, in many ways, he had quite a lot to him, John Major. He was from a quite humble background in southwest London. He worked in a bank, but he won the election in '92 quite totally unexpected. This was after the poll tax. He got rid of the poll tax quite sensibly, and he actually won the next election. The Labour Party just failed to make it, and this is one of the most despairing cartoons on the morning after the election, when I realised, oh my God, the Tories are in again for another 5 years. Oh no! So I based it on the old, I think it's a Russian image, but it could be anywhere, the old wedding cake thing. We rule you, we fool you, and I've added a bit. We thicken you, we sicken you, we tax you, we sax you, we're outrageous, but you vote for us. And it was a sort of cry of despair, that drawing. But despite that moment of victory, everything went bad for Major quite rapidly. He lost his reputation over being somebody who could control the economy, because there was a thing called Black Wednesday, when Britain fell out of the European exchange rate mechanism, and it cost them billions of dollars. That's when Soros was betting against them, George Soros, and the British government lost billions of pounds. It did for his reputation. So the rest of his 5 years was like a sort of slow death, which was sort of fun, but not fun, if you see what I mean. Thinking about his legacy, in Britain we have these things called traffic cones. I have to explain that. So traffic cones are what you see sort of on motorways, and he had a thing about traffic cones. He said, because he didn't want people to, he wanted people to, when there's traffic cones on the motorway or the freeway, he introduced this thing called a cones hotline. So people would ring up and say, what are these cones doing there? So here he is ringing up, hello, cone hotline, I have a problem. Anyway, sorry, I had to explain that gag. sorry, it's a British thing. He's the only leader I've ever known of any party anywhere who's actually challenged himself to a leadership contest, which he did in 1995. He called it lancing the boil of the right-wing opposition, because by this time he was loathed and detested by the right of the Tory party. He wasn't that left-wing. He was probably more left-wing than Tony Blair, actually, but he was hated by the right wing. That's the anti-Europe wing of the Tory party. And that's Major at home and Major down under. And then finally, as happens with all regimes that have been in for a long time, sleaze crept in. There was notes of corruption. There was envelopes with cash being passed and stuff like that. So this is called sleaze tease. In the end, you don't even have to draw them at all. Just draw, let the pants do the talking, as it were. So, here he is. One pant, here we are. And then finally, the slow death came to an end. He called an election in '97, and it was obviously they were going to lose badly. And boom, Unterhosendämmerung is correct German for a twilight of the underpants. And there he is, the pants sink into the Thames, blazing away. Along comes the next one, of course, Tony Blair. Now, Tony Blair is totally different. Much more actually in the Thatcher mould, strangely enough. But I took a while to get him. People called him Bambi because of his extreme youth. But the trouble with Bambi is Bambi doesn't have teeth, and Tony Blair has tons of teeth. First time I ever saw Tony Blair in the flesh, I thought, that man's got too many teeth. But it took a little while, and then I was again at a party conference in Blackpool in 1994 when he first became leader, and I just happened to note something. It was just a flicker, and I made a little sketch in my little sketchbook I always keep with me, and I sketch away. And it was very useful because that's the sketch, and I noticed something about the cast of his eyes. He's got an angry, staring left eye, angry and staring, and he's got a twinkly right eye, so angry and twinkly. So you put those together, and he has other prominent features, and you have a sort of ready-made caricature. And of course, where did it come from? There, I thought, who does it remind me of? Of course, that was drawn the same day as I did that sketch. That's Margaret Thatcher, so it's a Margaret Thatcher morph job. And Margaret Thatcher actually said about him, and this was a crowning insult, it showed how much she'd come to hate John Major. She said of Tony Blair, "My legacy is safe in his hands," which was a terrible insult to the person she's supposed to be supporting. And of course, a great accolade for Tony Blair, who actually did turn out to be even more right-wing than, or more right-wing than her, perhaps. But he was a Labour Prime Minister. Here he is. There was a product called I Can't Believe It's Not Butter. I don't know if you anyway, it was being advertised at the time. I can't believe he's not Tory. But the thing about Blair is, because he has these prominent features, big ears, pointy head, strange, weird eyes, and sort of prominent lower lip, you can attach him to any. This is the back end of a bomber with Bush at the front. Or you can make him a pylon. Or indeed, you can make him Bambi again. But this is a more sinister Bambi. This is a post-Iraq Bambi. And, well, Bush and Blair, we know what we have to thank them for. But essentially, there's an umbilical link with Thatcher, and that's what he's about. So that's a kind of blurring. And there's the mad eye. So it does exist, yes. Moving on. Of course, the double act which I referred to is Bush and Blair. This is Bush in 2000. Of course, I had no idea about Bush. When you cover politics from afar, as one does, and I'm doing it, I probably the rest of the world understands American politics a little bit, but not the way you do. You have something about politics. It's got a special smell, and being there helps. You know, especially going to see the events. So Bush I hadn't heard of. He was going on about compassionate conservatism, which sounded to me like bullshit, but whatever. The little guy, in case you wonder, is William Hague, who was then the Tory leader. He's a funny little bald guy. He's now Foreign Secretary, just in case you wonder. And then there was this strangely inconsequential election of 2000, the Florida problem in the autumn of 2000. And this was the day that Bush was actually made, by the Supreme Court, made president. They gifted it to him. So I thought, this guy's in the footsteps of Reagan, so I'll do him. Bedtime for Bonzo, chimp. I'll do Bush as a chimp. That was it. There's no other reason for it. But as soon as I started drawing him as a chimp, things fell together. It's like, you put a ray gun in every pore, and suddenly, yeah. And there's something about the way his ears hang quite low. That's kind of sort of chimpy. But there's also the way Bush moves. Now, you see Bush, this is Bush coming up to a podium. He has a kind of stiffness about it. And he sort of bigs himself up like that. He's trying to make himself look bigger than he is. It's not that he's a small guy, but it's a kind of Texan thing. And that is chimpy. The natural way to walk is to do it like that, because that's the way they hang comfortably. But that sort of set me thinking, and it sort of worked. That's why I did it. So I kept with a vengeance. And it always surprised me that nobody else sort of went on it. But I know it's disrespectful, but he does look Syrian. There's no getting away with it. This is his first visit to Europe. I think he arrived in Spain in Air Force One. And where am I? Is this Europe? But of course, it's one thing to be a cute character, but then a terrible thing happened. Of course, you don't need me to tell you about it, but I was drawing it on the day, as were hundreds of other cartoonists around the world, and probably hundreds of other cartoonists came out with exactly the same idea. It's just a sort of a horrible thing happening before your eyes, and you've got to do a comment of some kind. And that's always the difficult thing about this job, is you have to do it every day, no matter what, even when terrible things happen. So there was that, and the dread that was building, and part of my dread was thinking, oh God, what's this going to lead on to? What politically, this is going to be a disaster. And I was sort of right, because, the weekend afterwards, Blair was there, at Camp David, and they were both wearing bomber jackets. I don't know if you call these things bomber, but we call them bomber jackets. I've never seen Blair in a bomber jacket before or since, but the symbolism is obvious. And there's this other thing about Churchillian understatement. Everybody was coming on all Churchillian. We shall not flag nor fail. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight somebody or other on the beaches, in the fields, and on the hills of somewhere or other. We shall never surrender. And there was this kind of, in the air, there was this kind of, we shall be firm, we shall be tough. And so they go and start, well, this war that happened in Afghanistan has been happening ever since, this most noxious, dreadful, poisonous war. And for largely against people who'd never even heard of what a skyscraper was. This is a particularly egregious moment in Mazar-e-Sharif when, with bodies being blasted, then bulldozed into containers. Anyway, there was a sort of despairing thing. But anyway, there's one more taken off, and move on to start another one. You know, in Iraq, totally not even the ghost of a relationship with anything to do with Al Qaeda or the rest of it. And it was going to happen. There was just this sense that it was going to happen, and perhaps a lot of you felt the same thing. No matter what we do, what we say, it's going to go ahead. The phrases, again, that drip out of the radio, material breach of whatever the UN resolution, in order to justify this action that was coming very soon. And then, why won't they see things our way, George? The kind of monomania of it. It's sort of comic, but also hideous. And then the worst of all, I think, this phrase, this evil, nasty phrase. My fellow Americans have nothing to offer but blood, toil, shock and awe. Shock and awe? It just means blowing people to buggery. It's terror. That's what he means. But it's like a marketing concept. You're marketing this next war, and it's as bad as that. And the idea of a humanitarian thrust, this war which cost hundreds of thousands of lives, people still do, don't. So in the end, you as a cartoonist, you sort of reach a point of despair. So I did this, you know, it's just total disgust. There's only one sort of imagery that suits, really, is adequate to it, which is, of course, shit. Now, The Guardian are great to work for. I've been working for them a long time, and they're very, they let me get on with it, basically. I don't work at the paper. I work in Brighton, where I live, and I send it in email. But this time, I usually send it in as late as possible to give them as little time to find something wrong with it. But in this instance, it didn't work, because I had a phone call from Georgina Henry, who was editing the paper that day. She was the deputy editor. And she said, "Steve, there's too much shit in this drawing." So I sort of, oh, God. Anyway, so being The Guardian, though, we came to a sensible compromise, so I took out. So that was okay. But it's just that this is 2004, this is when the election campaign was going on here, and this hideous bombing campaign, suicide bombing, terrible carnage going on in Iraq. One of the advantages, if you like, or disadvantages of working these days as a cartoonist with computers at your disposal is I can access the Guardian's picture wires, and they've got all the pictures that are coming in from across the world. And there's some pretty nasty stuff, which doesn't actually get into the papers. And it goes back to the point I made about Vietnam, is that we're very squeamish about wars and the effects of wars, and we don't tend to show it. So I was trying a little way to redress the balance, to show some of the horrors, though I'm reinterpreting it as a drawing, of course, which distances it slightly. This is after the victory, and it's a kind of a despair. It's kind of comic, but it's also kind of serious as well. And then Creating Democracy. And then you might remember the Time magazine, where they decided to run the Hitler cover. In 1945, they ran a picture of Hitler with a red cross through it. He won the war. So they thought, we'll do the same thing with Saddam Hussein. So I thought, there's a problem here. What about the stuff you're not showing? So anyway, there's these pictures I was seeing on the wires of just little dead kids on trolleys in hospitals in Baghdad. They're redrawn, of course, just for, these are real people we're talking about here. You don't want to take their photos and abuse them, but they've been abused enough. But it just struck me as a sort of sick kind of, well, a sort of despairing moment, really, and it's sort of pinpointing the failures of our media, or us, if you like, as journalists, to face up to what the things we do. When things get heavy like that, I tend to sort of think about the Liberal Democrats in the UK. Now, this will need explaining, because Liberal Democrat to you probably means something else than it means to me. Liberal Democrats, I don't know how to translate it. It's more like you'd say the sort of douchebag party, I think. But they're kind of sort of wishy-washy, but they're liberal. They've been liberal for years. They're nice people. They're great people. They're lovely. But they're obsessed with liberal politics. So this was the party conference after 9/11. Now you can see Liberal Focus is their big magazine. It says, "World ends tomorrow. Liberal Democrats poised to take Norwich." Yeah. This is the Lib Dem leader, who is a nice guy called Charlie Kennedy, a Scots guy. He did a very good thing. He came out against the war in Iraq, which I thought was great, and the next election I actually voted for him. But this is a typical Lib Dem crowd. They've got a kind of sort of collectively soapy look like that. They wear these, yellow is the Liberal Democrat colour. I don't know why, it just is. That's Charlie. Charlie had a bit of a drink problem, so he had these sort of angry looking eyes. Go back to your constituencies and prepare for bed. And he was replaced, because of his drink problem, with another guy called Ming Carroll, who was an old guy. He wasn't that old, he's only a little bit older than me. I think he played up his age thing, so I sort of laid into him a bit. So go home to your constituencies and prepare for death. Some politicians think they're film stars, some politicians think they're God. This is Blair in typical godlike pose. He is dealing directly with the Almighty. But this is Bill Clinton. He doesn't think he's God at all. But going back to podium manner and the way politicians, the way they look, it's always interesting the way they look to me. And then he came to the Labour conference and did a speech there, and they loved him. They just loved him. And it's always kind of it's great to see somebody who can really play a crowd, play a room. This huge, well, it wasn't as huge as a convention, but it was a big, big room. And he was sort of talking very quietly like that. And he said the way he won their hearts was to say, Clinton, Bill, Arkansas, CLP, that means Constituency Labour Party. Now that's a Labour Party gag, and they loved him, he could have done anything to them after that. And he just sort of spoke very quietly, like people were listening to him, leaning forward. And he had that kind of command of a room, and it's quite spectacular when you see a politician who can do that. You sort of admire it grudgingly. To look at, he's interesting. He's got this kind of exploding duck's ass haircut at the top. But ultimately, it's the nose, stupid. He's got this sort of glowing red nose. But what he was doing was, he was telling Tony Blair what he wanted to hear. He was blowing in his ear and blowing sweet nothing. This is from 2004. This is John Edwards. So he happens to be in the news, so I threw it in. But I actually went to the Boston convention, and that was that was my first experience of a Democrat or any convention, really. And it's like a British party conference, but back to the power of 10. And the razzmatazz is unbelievable. I mean, the way the crowds are vast, the noise is tremendous, and the grins are huge, and it's a sea of faces. And the thing that strikes me most is the way all these signs come up and all these different slogans come up. And they say things like, "May God bless our journey. May God bless America." And everybody's, yeah. Now, you wouldn't get away with that in Britain, but there are other things. There are other different kinds of bullshit in Britain. But if you saw that many flags in Britain, you'd think this was a fascist rally. No, it doesn't apply. The Union Jack is slightly more sort of conflicted, as it were. But here you're all crazy all parties are crazy for the red, white, and blue. And it's dazzling to see when you're not used to it. This is John Kerry, who was the candidate then. This is some sketches, very rough sketches, you can see, of his body language. It's quite deliberate, chunky, huge chin. There's one person he reminded me of. And this is like wishful thinking about Bush. But unfortunately, it didn't happen, and the bastard won. Anyway. moving on to Great Britain, back to Great Britain again. This guy came on the scene in about 2005. Now, he won the leadership contest of the Tory party because the Tories have been through a string of really rather not very good leaders. And he's a different politician to Major and to Thatcher in the sense that Major and Thatcher came from quite humble backgrounds. They were grammar school educated, and Thatcher was a grocer's daughter. Major was I think he was the son of a circus performer. But David Cameron is different. David Cameron is very, very upper class. He is very rich, very wealthy, comes from that whole milieu. He went to Eton, he went to Oxford. He is plump, sleek, and rich. So young, gifted, and plump, if you like. But he did what the Tory party had to do, which was to change from being, it has been described as the nasty party. He had to change and make it more liberal, more caring, more sharing. And it was his first conference as leader in 2006, and it was the weirdest political experience I've ever been to, because Tory party conferences, you expect them to be like, you'd expect to be a GOP Republican one. It's full of, the right-wing psychos are all there. It's just that they were all being kept under wraps, and so they were being, everything was green and whooshing. It was like being underwater, you can see. And this backdrop, those leaves were actually moving. They go like that. And there's, speaking of, this is Cameron at his podium. Now, apparently, Cameron, I've never seen any other politician do this. He's got a wooden podium. This is like, it's like something out of church. It's a special wooden podium. He has it imported for every set-piece speech. And he likes to, I mentioned podium language, and he likes to sort of stroke his podium. He's a podium stroker. And he strokes the wood like that. But his body language is very sort of wired up. He's sort of behind the podium. He's writhing with pleasure and stroking it. And it's very slow and deliberate. His hand movements are like that, robotic. So it was the weirdest occasion ever, so I sort of did. You can see the traditional Tory crowd who were all stunned by what was going on. They couldn't quite work it out at all. And, this John McCain came to visit, so I was able to get a good close-up sketch of him. This is Dave on the right with his huge forehead, domed forehead. Here he is again. That's George Osborne, who's now the finance minister. And that's Dave. He's got very, very well coiffed, very sleek, slick back, very expensive haircut, expensive suits. And I did a strip about him because Dave likes to shoot. This is very unusual in Britain, I should say. I know everybody in America shoots, and you go and shoot stags every weekend and all that. But in Britain, that's very, very unusual for anybody to shoot anything. And he likes to go and shoot in Jura, in the off the Western Isles of Scotland. And he's renowned for being a really good shot, and he can shoot 2 stags with 2 shots. So those who really know me call me 2 stags. Read my lips, I am the future. 1 man, 2 stags. But there's also something androgynous about him. He's a strangely sexless character. What do we want? Man boobs. When do we want them? Soon. So he's very difficult for the impressionists to do. They don't do him. I don't know why they don't do him at all well. None of them have sort of got him. But he has this strange sort of, well, for me it's a kind of rubbery, sleek, smooth, and I'm coming up to why I draw him the way I do now. This is a US convention. You see, it's huge. It's 10 times the size. This is a football stadium full of people. This is Denver in 2008. That's Michelle. I don't know how I managed to get a view like that, but I think I was I wasn't really allowed there, but I've got a really good close view of her. That's Hillary. Now this is the thing about the signs that come up. Oh, suddenly Hillary's there. All these signs saying Hillary come up, and there are people sort of shuffling around these signs. It's like a sort of conveyor belt of signs coming out from these sheds around the back. Hillary, 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 and there she is. And then this huge crowd, and you see people who are sort of jabbering away. Blah, blah, blah. Is that mad? Are they mad? And you realise it's somebody talking to a camera up there, about half a mile away. And it's just it is completely unlike anything in the UK. But essentially, the process is the same. It's politicians getting up on their hind legs and having their 3 minutes in the spotlight. And some of them work, some of them don't. Most of them don't work, and that's the way with politics. Very few have got the talent to. Anyway, this is one of the ones who does. He's a very talented speaker. I remember seeing him in Boston. I didn't know who the guy was from Adam, but he gave this terrific speech, and he had the whole hall, had them there. I mean, you had to sort of lean forward. You just couldn't believe it. And he more or less did the same thing again in Denver. I didn't get a very good view of him, as you can see. I was stuck behind a camera. I tried to caricature him. As you can see, it's rather a poor effort. A little bit better, but it's difficult. It's difficult. Also, I'm conflicted by the fact I like this guy. I really like this guy. And in political cartooning is an attacking medium. So you don't really want to attack people you sort of feel positively about. So it's difficult. This is a bit better because it's taking the piss out of the mock Greek kind of statuary they had. There's McCain and there's the old chimp himself. It involved. We took a journey from Denver to St. Paul, and we went past Rushmore, and so I did a few alterations, as you can see. But it's wonderful. I was doing the sketches. We had this huge car. I think it was something like a Chevrolet motherfucker. It was a huge thing anyway. And I was sitting in the back with my watercolor set and drawing the landscape. It was just fascinating, fabulous landscape. And motorcycles. This is the Badlands appearing in the background. Wall Drug. These huge billboards appeared about 300 miles away. Wall Drug. You heard of Wall Drug? Yes. Yeah, you know about Wall Drug. There's a place called Wall, which has got a huge drugstore. Anyway, so that's the Badlands, which they got worse, then they got better. Anyway, and I love watercolor. That's something that's so great about having color in papers now, and I love the washy thing it does. And so I was really getting off on this, as you can see. As I was driving across America. Oh yeah, this is America. And then, from the sublime to the ridiculous. Then we arrived in St. Paul, and suddenly there was these guys with big bums and big Stetson hats. And of course, it was the Texan delegation. They were all wearing the same. It's like uniform hat colour. And here was one of the most chilling figures. I'd always thought Laura Bush. What's that nice girl like her doing, going out with a psycho like him? But seeing her in the flesh made me think, oh, maybe, yeah. She was rather chilling. That's Cindy McCain behind her. This is the backdrop, which had this flag. I mean, it was the size of, God knows, about 200 feet, 200 yards across, flapping gently in the backdrop. Very dramatic. This is a typical GOP delegates. They're actually just like Tory delegates, just the same, you know. And this is the stage. They're talking about Minnesota's 3,000 lakes, and that was one of them. This is Laura introducing her husband, who was supposed to, I was hoping to see Bush in the flesh at last. And of course he didn't turn up because he was dealing with Hurricane Gustav. So he came by video link. So I was able to draw his huge face on the screen, and this is him. This is the nearest I ever got to drawing George Bush live. And it's strange sort of, well, he's obviously a sort of busted flush by now. The power's drained away from him. There was something weird about the Alaska delegation. There they are. And this is the Texan delegation again with a sea of hats. And this guy, he struck me as a weird. This is Romney, of course, and Romney was going out. In those days, he wasn't the front runner then. He was and also ran. But there is something strange about that guy's eyes. He's got these incredibly dark, thick-set eyes. What he was saying was pretty noxious as well, but that's Romney. So it's quite useful to have that. But the most noxious speech of all was this one from Rudy Giuliani. And he was the warm-up act for Sarah Palin. And this is your former mayor. This is New York. This is a guy who, mayor of the most, I call it the most cosmopolitan city on earth. And he was using the term cosmopolitan as a derogatory term. And that's what Hitler used to do. I mean, that's exactly the trick. Cosmopolitan. It's like a sort of dirty word. It just means a mixture of cultures. What's wrong with that? And it was one of those nasty, dishonest speeches. I mean, the guy's obviously got more to him than that. But anyway, he was introducing this character. That's a first attempt. There's something wrong with that. And I realised what it was. She's got this jaw, really big, chunky jaw. And she came on stage. Again, didn't know her from Adam. I was watching her. I was there in the hall watching her. And believe it or not, it was actually quite an impressive display. Because this was a big, big hall, and she had it in the palm of her hand. She was telling them what they wanted to hear. I mean, it was evil crap, but... and she had a horrible, high-pitched voice like that, but it was actually giving them what they wanted. And they'd had McCain, and McCain is the most useless speaker. Imagine, He's got no presence at all. He's got a poor little guy with his funny arms. And the poor, the poor old red-blooded Americans, they wanted somebody to cheer, and he was... So she came along, and they could go crazy. Yeah! Oh! So it was fun. It was great to observe it. There he is again. And then I was able to turn it into a finished cartoon, if you like. And if you put lipstick on a pig to nowhere, you're still in a pig to nowhere. This is a terrible cartoon. This is awful. This is me doing... You can see I'm conflicted because I'm feeling great. He's won. Wonderful, wonderful. And it's a mixed-up mess of, American references. And the likeness is hopeless. It doesn't look anything like him. It's a mixture of the Statue of Liberty, George Washington, Lincoln. It's a terrible... I'll just show you, see how bad I can be sometimes. Just yeah? Oh, God. This is slightly better, but it's not really a caricature. Blessed are the car makers, for they shall be makers of cars. So I had to work at it in the strip. So here he is. He's looking in the mirror. My chin is looking kind of long. Maybe I need a beard. Yeah. Hey, and my head is feeling the cold. Maybe I need a hat. Nothing too outrageous. One of those little square ones should do it. I don't recall putting on a coat with dancing red polka dots. Anyway, Mr. President, put the hat down and stand away from the beard. But he obviously inaugurated, that was the inauguration, and people flocked to be with him. One of the first people who flocked from abroad to be with him was, of course, our own Tony Blair. You might remember. He had a prayer breakfast. I don't know why, so I imagined what it might be like. This is my imagining of it. There's Arthur, the crazy world of Arthur Brown. There's some kind of mullah there. There's a guy with a cow. Anyway, but Blair is a monster. I haven't really shown you the worst of Blair because the guy should really be on trial. I think his defence is that he is just this: I lied in good faith. There's no such concept really. Anyway, back to Dave. Now, you might notice something about Dave's head. It's sheathed in rubber. Now, I've gone the whole hog and I've put a condom over his head. And why, I'll explain. It's because I tried doing him as a jellyfish. He was going on about the need for transparency, the need for openness, because there was a whole sort of scandal about MPs' expenses. So I tried to think of the only transparent organism I could think of, which is, of course, a jellyfish. So I did, hi, I'm Dave the jellyfish. I can sit on a bike, and I'm completely transparent, which is fine. It sort of worked up to a point, but the trouble was, it's a real pain in the arse to draw a jellyfish every day. So suddenly these posters appeared with this great impudent head poking up at the side, and it was sort of smooth and sleek. And I know he's not airbrushed. I've been up close and I'd watched him, and I knew, no, this guy's not, because people were saying he'd been airbrushed. I said, no, that's not airbrushed. That's genuine. So I sort of unrolled this thing over, and for me it sort of worked. I don't know why, but it was rude. But he does look like, when you twist a balloon, he's got that kind of head. And here he is. This is a picture I took following him around again in a conference. As you can see, he's got no hair follicles at all. It's completely smooth. His policies, by now they're in government, of course, and this is about the health service, and they're making a terrible mess of the health service. I mean, the Tories hated the health service from its inception. They voted against it, and ever since they've been trying to abolish it. But the trouble is it's too popular, so they daren't say they're abolishing it, so they do it in subtle ways. So they're marketising it intensely. They're turning it into a market model, and that's what they've done recently. So imagine this bedpan is full of money. Now I spin the bedpan like this. That's a fair summing up of what they're doing to the health service. It's making a complete screw-up. But anyway, this is, I think, Cameron's creed, from each according to their vulnerability to each according to their greed. And this is a Cameron foreign policy, which isn't much different from the Blair one, to be honest. The whole Libya thing, which is a proposing no-fly zone. And then, so coming to near the present now, there's been, you know Murdoch, you've heard of Murdoch. Murdoch is here, Murdoch runs Fox. But in Britain, Murdoch is a whole scale of evilness more. Murdoch has this monopoly position. He owns 40% of the British press, that's the printed press. He owns all the satellite, which is called Sky, which means he influences it, though he's not allowed by law to have the same influence over Sky as he does over Fox. There's different legislation in Britain, thank heavens, but anyway. The relations between the Sun, which is a Murdoch paper, and the government and the police has always been questionable. Murdoch, at the beginning of his empire, in the days of Thatcher, had a kind of trade-off with Margaret Thatcher, whereby she brought in this anti-trade union legislation, and he made use of it. He sacked his entire workforce. He had to fight them off for a year using police power. So it was like almost like a paid private army. So there has been an unhealthy and unholy relationship. But no other politician dare speak out against it because he's so powerful, and of course he has the power to trash anybody because of his power over the papers. The Sun is the most egregious example. It's a vicious, nasty right-wing rag. It can be quite funny sometimes, but when it goes for people, it really goes for the jugular. This is Gordon Brown. Now, the Labour Party came into an unholy relationship. Tony Blair, he was in Rupert's good books, so Rupert held off. But Rupert turned on Gordon Brown. Now, Gordon Brown, this is Gordon Brown saying, "Mr. Murdoch, about your contract, you already have my soul, so where is my guaranteed positive coverage?" Flump. And this is what the Sun turned to. This is not much of a paraphrase of a front page where they trashed Gordon Brown. The reason they were trashing him was because, you know, there are soldiers dying in Afghanistan constantly. He wrote to the grieving mother of a soldier who died, he wrote a handwritten note. Now, it was misspelt. He misspelt her name. He's got slightly scruffy writing, but the Sun took this as a personal insult, and they went for him. They had a front page about what it meant. I'm paraphrasing it slightly. "Respect our cannon fodder, you shameful, blundering Scotch bastard." Not much of an exaggeration. And it's covered with poppies. Poppies are what people wear at remembrance time. And the popular press make an obsession of it. It drives me mad, but anyway. The Guardian, the dear old Guardian, my paper, has been working on this story for years, Nick Davis, about phone hacking and about what the Murdoch Empire, News International, the papers, the News of the World especially, but in fact the other ones as well. And it all came to the surface when the news about this murder victim called Millie Dowler, it was discovered that her phone had been hacked. And people were just utterly shocked, disgusted by that. This was the day that story broke. This is Murdoch, of course. The woman on the right is this woman called Rebecca Brooks, as she now is. It used to be Wade, now Brooks. She was actually the head of News International in the UK. She was a very senior executive. I think Murdoch has a sort of super passion for her. I can't understand it otherwise. He stood up for her to the bitter end, and he's still standing up for her. But you knew as soon as that story broke, she was going to go, and she did. And she's been arrested twice. You know, there's a serious chance she could go to jail. This is the last edition of the News of the World. They announced while I was drawing this, they said that it wasn't going to appear the next week. And this is the biggest selling paper in the country, I should add. This is no small thing. I mean, it's like The Sun, but in some ways worse. And it was the one where they were doing all the naughty hacking. I think other papers were doing it as well, but this is the most, the worst example. And this is the trio of James Murdoch, Rupert Murdoch, and Rebecca. Right? And the fact that the British Legion, who are the Poppy organisation, finally withdrew support. They said they wouldn't advertise in the News of the World. That was the kiss of death. That was it. As soon as you heard that, they're gone. They're toast. They had to close it. Then you had this wonderful parliamentary inquiry, which the results have just been announced, the verdict this week, that he's unfit to manage. Rupert Murdoch is cordially invited to an arse-kicking party in the Palace of Westminster on the occasion of your fall from grace. Please bring an arse. Anyway, I don't know, you have this concept of an arse-kicking party. It's a British gag. Anyway, sorry about that. And then there was a wonderful moment of his appearance before this committee. He actually, Mr. Evil was there. And he was the most disgraceful old git. I mean, he started off by saying, "Stop. This is the most humble day of my life." Lying old shit. No, it wasn't. It's just complete con, a complete act. And then he started slapping the table like that to emphasise. And of course, his wife, who realises this is a bit over the top. So poking about, don't slap the table. And there was his idiot son, James, you know, hopeless, deadbeat. Now he's claiming he didn't know anything. This is one of the most, you know, hierarchical organisations, top-down, pyramid-type organisations, run by this old git. And here he is, but nobody told me anything. It was a plot to keep me in the dark. Lying old fool. Anyway, enough of bloody murder. Europe, things are getting bad. There's been terrible problems with sovereign debt crisis. Greece is in the crap. This is Angela Merkel and Nicolas Sarkozy, who hopefully will be gone this weekend. I can only hope, anyway. The Conservatives have a terrible, conflicted position about Europe, in the sense that most Conservatives hate Europe. They hate anything to do with Europe. They hate the European Union, even though we're part of it. And Europe being in trouble is great news. So this is him inserting himself into the dialogue. This again is a bondage scene with Sarkozy is always in the supplicant position, because I think the French economy is in slightly worse nick than the German economy. But I think the German economy is going to have to come to terms with the fact that they are going to have to devalue the euro, and quite soon. But anyway, that's another story. Oh, the Rupert Murdoch thing came back with an added fun dimension, which was known in the UK as Horsegate. You might not have known this, but it transpired that Rebecca Cameron rode the horse and then tried to cover it up. It was this was Horsegate. Anyway, so I did not have relations with that horse. So sometimes it just falls out of the sky. It's that manna from heaven. And there this is Jimmy going the way he's going. And this is most recently the Leveson inquiry. Now, well, the Leveson inquiry is quite serious because it's before a judge and they're sworn testimony. So it's not like the parliamentary one where they're not sworn testimony. They're actually having to tell the truth. If they don't, they're perjuring themselves. Was I either dishonest or incompetent? No, I was honest and discompetent. And this is a noxious little culture minister called Jeremy Hunt. And I was his little friend. They were like that. And me. And there's something about... there's this thing I just heard yesterday about texts between David Cameron and Rebecca Brooks. 12 a day. 12 texts a day. What's that all about? Oh, it gets thicker and thicker. And I can't wait to get back. Anyway. And then that's what I did last week. Cover up the cover. It's just ridiculous. Sometimes you just can't believe it, but they'll do it anyway. Anyway, enough of Murdoch, I don't know. And the whole rendition thing is cropping up again. I have no recollection of any... This is politician speak. I have no recollection, which means I know exactly what you're saying, but I'm not going to say yes. I've forgotten. I have no recollection. It's a politician code. I just woke up in Washington with my mouth stuffed with money. Let's look on a happy note. This is the royal wedding last year. For some reason, I don't know why William looks like a horse. They just struck me. So royal thoroughbred, member of the servant class. Now, this is the interesting thing about Kate. Kate is actually common as muck. She's the granddaughter of a miner. A miner. Common? Common or what? I mean, at least Di was an aristocrat, but she's common. We're all in this together. That's a favourite Tory slogan. My arse, that's my addition. Anyway. And, of course, we've got the Jubilee this year. There's 2 royal events on the trot. Oh, wonderful joy. You could be so grateful you haven't got a bloody monarchy. Anyway, we've got months of this crap. There we are. 60 glorious years on benefits. Never signed on. Diamond Liz. Anyway, so you'll be able to buy mugs if you want mugs, anyway. And just to end on a happy note, the demise of Thatcherism. Anyway, that's it. And we can, if anybody wants to ask questions, I'd be delighted to.
Could you go back to the beginning where you studied before you went to try and teach?
Well, I studied art for many years. I was brought up near London in Slough. That's my hometown. Well, you sound like you're from the north. I moved north when I was about 17, so I went to art college in Middlesbrough. Yeah, I did. And then I went to university in Leeds, so I was, spent a good time in Yorkshire.
I'm from Middlesbrough. The Leeds School of Art.
Oh, well, there you go. There's a connection.
But
So,
I'm good into design.
oh, right. Oh, well, I did fine art, which nobody quite knows what that is, but so I did that, and then I came out of, I think I studied it for about 5 years, came out and thought I never thought of doing this for a living. I just didn't think, it's not feasible. I had to come at it by a background route, so I had to do something else that I hated so much that I had to escape from it, and that was teaching. Now, I just wasn't cut out to be a teacher. I found teaching incredibly stressful. When I've got 8 deadlines a week, nothing, just a breeze. It doesn't worry me in the least. But teaching was something I used to dread Monday morning. You know, on Friday night, I think, oh God, it's going to be Monday morning in 2 days, and it was that as bad as that. And it was only the realisation that I had to have these wisdom teeth out, and it was such a painful operation that year. And I realised, thank God I don't have to go into school on Monday. And I thought, what are you doing? Stop now. And it was in reverse. I always go into things in reverse. And I had a friend who was cartooning. He was starting to get work as a guy called Kipper Williams. He does stuff in The Guardian and other places as well. And he led the way, and I followed him. I thought, I'll have a go at that.
Well, can you talk a little bit about how your drawing changed? Because this is very infra-digger at your College of Art, this form of drawing.
Yeah, well, certainly in those days there were no cartooning courses. I think there probably are now. This was like 45 years ago. This is and cartooning was something you just did to please yourself. It wasn't any, and actually, the nice thing about cartooning, there is no career path. You do it. You have to do this kind of cartooning. You have to have a kind of a desire to sound off, if you know what I mean. Which starts, I suppose, in my case, it starts off with shouting at the radio. So when there's this crap going on, fucking shut up. So I've got this wonderful outlet, which is great. So that it helps to have to have an angle, I suppose. So, I mean, I wasn't particularly right-wing, left-wing when I was a kid. I was actually a Tory supporter, I remember, but, things changed and I grew up. And so, yeah.
I thank you for all of this. I wish we had a Mr. Bell in this country. Yes, we need you. Where do you see the United States going? You kind of stopped with the beginning of Obama, didn't cover the Tea Party, but where do you see us going?
Well, of course, the Tea Party is eminently caricaturable, and I've done it a couple of times. But it's always a problem, me doing stuff about America, because on a very crucial level, I don't understand. I just don't have the kind of... With Bush is kind of, the smell of politics spreads abroad because somebody like him is so obviously ridiculous that... But how it's going, I mean, how do you think it's going? I have no idea. It does seem incredible. The Tea Party thing is very hard to get one's head around from looking from abroad, because our Tory party is like your Liberal Democrat party. They're liberals. They're in favour of gay marriage. It's totally strange, but they are all mixed together, and it is they call themselves broad churches, but it's full of people who hate each other. That's the same with all political parties. It's just that sometimes, like now in GOP, they are really holding all the. They seem to have all the levers of power, don't they? This is strange.
Is it?
Since you work is in Europe, you specialize
Sir?
only in English and American politicians and world leaders?
Yeah, I do any ones that I suppose I'm obviously doing mainly British and probably American, just because they crop up more. I mean, there was some of Sarkozy and Merkel. That's obviously a big story over there.
French one?
Yeah, I will be doing Hollande when I get back. I hope he wins. I mean, obviously that's he's perhaps more somebody I'd find more sympathetic. But on the other hand, he looks very caricaturable. They call him Monsieur Flamby, which is the name of a sort of milk pudding, which sounds great.
Don't ask a question until you
Oh, right. So, well, yeah, that was just a question about do I do European and other world leaders? Yeah, I mean, I do, but obviously my main focus is on British politics.
Do you think the Tories are going to win the next election?
Don't say that. Oh,
I
God.
think it might happen.
I hope not. I mean, anything's possible. I mean, Boris Johnson just won the mayoralty, which is very depressing. But then that's more of a personality contest. And Ken, you may not know Ken Livingstone, who was the Labour mayor 4 years ago. He got beaten the first time by Boris Johnson, who is another rich guy. Went to Eton, was a member of this club called the Bullingdon Club. They all wear blue bow ties and tailcoats. Why he won, I think, because Ken Livingstone had a terrible press. He had the entire press against him. There's only one monopoly evening paper in London, which is called the London Evening Standard. And that ran a campaign of vilification when he was kicked out 4 years ago. It carried on with the same. There was a nothing story about his tax affairs. It really was. This is not corruption. It's just bullshit. But they were building it up as if he was somehow a hypocrite and corrupt. And Ken Livingstone has always been attacked by the papers. And he's one of the few people who's withstood the full wrath of the Sun. They criticised him because he spoke to Sinn Féin. Now, you know Sinn Féin are now in the arms of government. This was back in the 80s. He was utterly vilified, utterly trashed, personal abuse, personal attacks, and the Sun, when it gets going, can really go for people. Now, he withstood that, and I always admired Ken for that. So it's particularly depressing that he's lost this election again to Boris. Boris is a nice enough chap. He's a young bloke. He's sort of bumbling, got a kind of cheeky, kind of jokey persona, but it is depressing when politics goes like that, and it gives you pause for thought, because the Labour leader is a kind of strange guy called Ed Miliband. I hope Ed can do it, but you know it's going to be difficult. It's going to be very difficult, especially with the press the way it is. The press in the UK is almost exclusively right-wing, except for there's the exception of the Guardian, possibly the Independent a little bit, and the Daily Mirror, which is the smaller of the popular tabloid papers. All the other papers, which is 80% of them, are Tory and virulently pro-Tory. So it's always difficult.
So Steve, you showed us 30 years of cartoons. What kind of reactions do they get?
Well, mixed. You get it's the same thing about meeting politicians, and you know, I still meet quite a lot of them. I go to these conventions every year, conferences as we call them, and I'm quite happy to talk to them. And the thing is that politicians always like you abusing their opponents, and you'll find that, say there's 600 MPs, well, you abuse one of them, you've got 600 people on your side, or 599 people on your side against this one person. It works like that. They always the Tories liked my stuff when I was laying into Blair, because of course they hated Tony Blair too, despite the fact that David Cameron is a sort of Tony Blair tribute act. The cartoon which I didn't explain that I showed you of him, he's very impressed by Tony Blair, and he's taken Tony Blair's act on totally, and but because I was doing Labour so long, they thought I was anti-Labour, but in fact I'm actually pro-Labour. It's just I'm anti-Tony Blair. Anyway.
But does the Guardian ever get, phone calls saying you put a condom on the head of our leader of our party?
Ah, well, that's interesting you should say that. I never. Well, they might have done, but I actually complained from the editor. He didn't like it. The editor really objected to the condom, and I was a bit shocked actually, because it's not happened before where the editor has said don't draw somebody in that particular way. I mean, the usual thing with the paper, I told you about the shit problem, the taste and decency issue, which comes up. The other thing you're likely to get is libel now, and we've got these quite stringent libel laws in the UK, which are quite prohibitive. But over the years, I've learnt to work my way around them, and you can really abuse politicians, and they won't sue you. They would just look very stupid if they did. So you sort of know that at the back of your mind. But God, I forgot what I was saying. what happened with the editor was that he took exception to the condom, and I couldn't work out why. He said, well, what's the problem? It's just a piece of rubber. It has some sort of slightly rude connotations, but, you know, kids have said, you know, adverts saying, wear a condom, blah, blah, blah. And he thought it was too rude, and he asked me to desist. And I said, what do you mean? We had this rather bitter exchange of emails, and it actually came to see. I was thinking, I can't take this. Is mad. I laugh now, but it was quite serious at the time. Anyway, so after this had been going on a few months, I came to a compromise where I put his head in rubber, but I didn't put any condomy bits. It sounds ridiculous, I know. It's hard to explain, even harder to believe, but that's how it went. And it wasn't satisfactory from anybody's point of view. And eventually, I had this email late one evening, and it was from Alan Rusbridger, who's the editor. And he said, quite cryptic, he said, I'm at a dinner. I am being trashed for the condom ban. The condom ban is hereby revoked. So it was great. You know, he lifted it. So, but it was difficult. It was seriously difficult because, you know, ultimately the editor decides. You've got, you know, I can't say, you know, I've got no clause in my contract that says you can do exactly what you want. Ha ha ha. That doesn't work like that. Ultimately, it's always going to be the editor who decides. And by and large, they just let me get on with it, which is I'm eminently grateful for. But it did create a little problem. I don't think there were any complaints about it. It was just an obsession of the editor. I don't know why. So, yeah.
Can we get a mic over here?
Do any of your subjects ever approach you and ask why they've been drawn? I mean, has Cameron ever come up to you and said, why am I a condom?
Yeah, he has. Yeah, believe it or not, yes. Yeah. Not just once, but 3 times. I mean, it is strange because I've been doing it for so long now. I infest these party conferences, and he's only a young bloke. He's probably 20 years younger than me, and that's why I draw him so rubbery, because he's so young. But during the election campaign, I was making a film with a guy. We were doing a film for the website, and me and this filmmaker guy, Alex, he was his name. We were driving around following Cameron on a madcap 24-hour dash from south of Scotland down to the southwest of England, which just sounds crazy, and was. And we were following him from place. He was going like from a rally in south of Scotland to a fire station late at night in Carlisle, which is on the border, having fish and chips. You know, all photo ops. It's just completely mad. The sort of thing that happens in elections is kind of nonsense that politicians get up to. But it's great fun to follow and to observe, and I was doing sketches at the same time. Anyway, we had a busy day of it. We'd been driving all day. We thought we'd stop for a burger at the service station on the motorway, and Alex and I were sitting there having our burger, and then Alex said, oh, look, he's over there. He's at the door, and he was at the door of the service station. And he just sort of came in and sort of went into a shop, and then he went out again. So we sort of rushed over, had a look, you know, rubbernecking, and there was his battle bus in the car park, and then they were having just a little break, and he was they were sort of wandering around, and so we were sort of standing there, and unfortunately we left the camera locked in the car, so we didn't have any record of it. But then he came over to me. Now, I'd never met the guy before. I'd met lots of his colleagues and stuff, and he was probably told who I was by one of his colleagues. I'm always there looking up his nose at who he is. And he came over to me and said, oh, hi. What's this condom thing all about? So I said, perfectly truthfully, I think, I said, well, it's to do with the smoothness of your complexion and your extreme youth. And yeah, he was perfectly personable, perfectly nice. He looked me straight in the eye. He was perfectly, yeah, he could do a sincerely real human being. He was very good at it, which is a great. And the thing I did notice close up, he has got these amazing crow's feet crinkle line. Again, incredibly balloon-like, but there you go, which I was sort of noting away in the back of my mind while I was talking to him. So it was perfectly good-natured. I asked him, well, what have you been doing? What are you doing there? He said, oh, I've been buying a book. He was buying a Patricia Cornwell book, to put himself to sleep on the bus. There you go. So, anyway, that was. I didn't say because you're a dick. That would have been rude. We're very polite in the UK. But then it happened again. So a few months later, after he'd won, he sort of half won the election. He came into government coalition. Again, this was a party conference, and it was a sort of there's a paper called The Spectator magazine. It's a sort of, and they had this sort of champagne party, and of course all the politicians won't be seen drinking champagne because it's time of austerity. So he was drinking what looked like plain water. Anyway, he came round with his entourage, which actually included Rebecca Brooks and Andy Coulson. And he was doing the rounds. He came round to me. And I was standing with Simon Hoggart, my esteemed colleague and old friend, and so he sort of came over. He said, "You're not still doing that old condom thing, are you?" And then I said, I think I said it, but I don't think he heard. I said, "That's the worst possible thing you could have said." Because if he'd said, "I'm loving every minute of the condom," I would have dropped it like a hot brick. But he said, so what can you do? And he came up with the deathless phrase. He said, "You can only push a condom so far." Which is very true. You know, it's very true advice for life and for politics.
What about Blair?
Sorry?
What about Blair?
Blair, no. Blair, well, I've met and talked to Blair. I mean, I met during the election campaign in '97. And again, he was very sort of... But it was more like as this sort of rictus. You could see this guy was really under control. It's like, "Hi, yeah." And I didn't think... He couldn't do human quite the way as... Cameron was very good at doing human, yeah. He was doing so rabbit in the headlights, rictus. And he didn't ask me about caricature. I don't think he would. He wouldn't. I think he's probably got more sense, to be honest. Mm-hmm. The thing is, that if they do object to something, if they let you know, then it's like a bonus. You know, it's like it's payola. You know, this is what you don't want them to like it. It's you're not doing your job otherwise. So Thatcher I never met, and Major I never met. But Major was on the record as when he was asked about the underpants. This is in a biography, so it is on a sort of record. He was asked about the underpants. He said, "It's designed to destabilise me, so I ignore it." Which was the wrong answer. He should have just ignored it. So anyway, there you go. It's very difficult. You're a politician, and especially with people like me hurling crap at you all the time. But that was sort of.
Thank you. Are there any other political cartoonists in England that work for other newspapers?
Yeah, there's loads. Yeah, we have quite a.
They come from a different direction. Is it interesting when you're both doing cartoons on the same subject matter?
It's probably not as polarised as it is here. I think there is a difference in the papers in the sense like the heavyweight papers like the Times, the Telegraph, the Guardian, the Independent. They tend to let their cartoonists do what they like. They don't impose a line. The tabloid papers, the higher selling ones, like the Sun, the Mirror, the Sun especially will. I know the Sun cartoonist. There's a couple of guys. There's a guy called Andy Davies. He's a very good cartoonist, but he's not allowed really to do what he wants to do. He has to do a cartoon on the subject they want to do and with the line they want. That's the way the tabloids operate. It's much more controlling. With the things like my oppo on the Times, which is a Murdoch paper, but Murdoch, I think, gave some pledge many years ago not to overtly interfere with the line. Peter Brooks is a great cartoonist. He does some really good stuff. I wouldn't always see eye to eye with Peter, but our differences are, on some issues, he's quite to the right of me. On other issues, we see these things the same way. So it's not quite like a sort of, it's not as polarised as you'd think. And my colleague on the Independent, Dave Brown, is as virulent as I am, really.
If you would look at the cartoon done by you and done by some other cartoonist on a particular event without any words, without any words, could you definitely look at them and say this is right or this is left?
So you can usually. I mean, I think it's fairly. I mean, political. Some issues are are blurred, and some issues are you're either pro one or pro the other, and it's not necessarily a left-right split. Some cartoons, as you described, perhaps cartoons which have few or no words. Now, this perhaps applies across the world. You find there's a kind of global cartoon. Cartoons are important all over the world. I mean, there are people doing, especially in the Arab world, you'll find people doing cartoons, and they have a very important role. And within the confines of quite strict societies, they do have some leeway. I know some Jordanian cartoonists. Now, they don't by any means have the leeway I do, but they have there's a certain amount there they get away with. But you can't strictly classify everything as left or right. I mean, some people are left on some things and right on others. It's a crazy mixed up world. I wouldn't say everybody's as politically obsessed as I am, and there's no other cartoonist goes to the party conferences and draws them all the time the way I do. I mean, that's kind of nuts, really.
As dramatic as yours?
Well, it's hard to say. I think the cartoons in Britain are very different from American cartoons in the sense that American cartoons have to exist in a situation where there's syndication. People work for a paper in a particular area, so papers tend to be local. They don't tend to be ideologically divided. So the local paper will cater for all viewpoints. So that tends to make the cartoons perhaps less provocative than they would be otherwise. You see, The Guardian is identified as a liberal paper. Now, I say liberal, it's not left-wing, it's liberal, which means it runs left-wing stuff, but it's basically a liberal paper. That's a middle-of-the-road paper. It's the only paper that supported the Liberal Democrats at the last election. So presumably it's the only paper that wanted a coalition. I think Rusbridger, my editor, is probably, I'd see him as a sort of liberal Tory, if anything. How do you know? It's hard to assess people's politics. Politics in the UK is very different, and cartooning is very different. Our stuff is probably ruder, probably more, there's probably less labels. Labels tend to be, you get a lot of labels in US cartoons, which is, I always find it a bit depressing seeing labels, because it's like spelling out what the picture should be saying. You know, a picture has a way, you look at a picture, you take on the meaning. It should be within the picture. You shouldn't have to spell out on the side of an ox, the deficit. You know, it's just crazy. But that happens perhaps too often. It's not all bad. I mean, you can do great cartoons using those techniques. And there have been great cartoonists who use lots of labels. I'll freely admit that. It's just I don't see it as a way forward. I think pictures have to have a bit of ambiguity about them. I think it really is important not to be, because otherwise how are you going to get through to people? What you want to do, I think, what I want to do as a cartoonist, is to slightly disturb, which can mean to make laugh, because laughter is a kind of disturbing thing. But I also want to sort of make people think perhaps in the way I see things. But cartoons are not recipes whereby you say, this cartoon means X, Y, Z, bum, 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 that's what it is. A cartoon has a meaning, almost regardless of what it's created. It will say something, and sometimes you're not entirely in control of it. Is that?
Yeah, we're running out of time. One more question.
One more question.
If there is one.
Sure, a sketchbook's here. I got lots. These are my sketchbooks here.
Anybody with one last question?
There's one of John Kerry there.
A very flippant question. Do you get into character when you're doing your work at home? Because you've shown us the characters a few times here.
I suppose I do. I mean, in some ways I'm a failed sort of, I have a sort of dramatic, thespian is the word, that's right. I have dramatic tendencies which I had to keep under wraps. So it's like, it's like a sort of closet exhibitionist. So I can rave at that's why I like working on my own, because I can talk to myself endlessly and put on the voices and talk it through. Well, so much you have to do that, because it... That's how I pictured it. Oh, you're quite right there.
All right, thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.